365 Sports. And Scott Dochterman of The Athletic joins us now. And Scott, you were in Nashville for, I've called it the Legion of Doom meeting between Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti and the Big Ten and the SEC. I ask everybody who's kind of been around this question because I'm curious on where the opinion goes on it. I get the feeling that Greg Sankey does not have anything else other than the SEC's best interest at heart when he says or does things, even though he will say that, no, I do care about the greater interest of college athletics. After this week, I really feel like that's been maybe even more solidified in my mind. Am I wrong? Am I out there just worried about the boogeyman or no?
No, I think you're onto something there. I mean, I think both of them are interested in preservation of college athletics to some extent and how they can reform it. Some of the comments I haven't quite got to yet regarding the NCAA and the changes there. I mean, they're very profound and there's going to be massive change there. But I think both commissioners, both Craig Sankey and Tony Petitti, their best interests are to serve their constituents, their conferences, and those two have separated themselves in every single way possible. And the fact that they're working together, it's kind of like there are a lot of historical meetings and decisions made. I don't know that I want to go into some of the descriptions I've thought of, but dividing the world in half. But I do think that but they are meeting. Yesterday in particular, it was a lot of it was about how they work together and how these schools work individually after, now with the House case fallout. And a lot of it was just kind of like, when a lot of us journalists get into a bar and start talking about shop, and that's kind of what they did, except they didn't really have the alcohol that day. Yeah. And they're just trying to get some of their ideas out there. So, yeah, I mean, they definitely do have the best interest of their leagues, but I think they do have an eye on the entire operation of college athletics.
Greg Sankey is not a fan of any of these College Sports Tomorrow or Project Rudy proposals, is he?
Neither one of them are.
Yeah.
They both shot him down yesterday vividly. I mean, Tony was kind of more on the side of, hey, we could do any of this if we wanted to. We don't need a private equity firm to come and, float a bunch of money and then own us, to do this. And then Sankey was even more pointed with a lot of his comments. He was not enamored, and he's like, it's no coincidence that they released these plans right before we were getting ready to meet. They wanted to try to get everybody to talk about this, and they just don't have any interest whatsoever in reorganizing the sport because, let's face it, they make the most money. They have the brands that they want under their tent. If they want other brands, they'll acquire them. They have no interest in sharing that with anybody. And why would they if they're sitting in that position? So I think that it's, we're years away. I mean, we're another lawsuit where everybody goes bankrupt away for something like this actually happening.
So what do you feel that they think is the long-term future? Do they have a plan, or is this still, because that's where I get lost in all this of, do the leaders of this sport really have at least a broad strokes idea that everybody can get on board with of what the long-term future of this is?
I don't think they have a plan yet because it's everything is still happening. The House case was just approved earlier this week. They're trying to figure out how are they going to make sure that all these coaches know exactly how many scholarships they're going to have, how much money they're going to be able to pay. Are they going to have to pay it based on male-female student-athlete ratio, or can they do it on marketability? I mean, there's a lot of really big, important questions that are coming to bear in very soon, and same thing with 2026 with the college football playoff landscape. But I think what they're doing is they're kind of setting the table for how they divide and conquer in 26 and beyond, which is not only through the college football playoff, but also the fact that these two large entities that have been geographical rivals for well beyond college sports history are now going to work together and that includes having more games against one another, more postseason action against one another, probably how they're going to figure out what they want to collectively do in the college football playoff. So that's really kind of, they're laying the groundwork for how they go about this in the future.
One of the things I read in Ross Dellinger's column, and I know you were there for this too, but one source is saying that the days of college teams losing money on bowl games are over. So what does that mean for the future of the majority of these bowl games?
Well, finally, the leagues and the schools have realized that they're more important than the bowl games. I mean, the years of, hey, we're going to go there, we're going to have a good time, and then they're going to make us, take 20,000 tickets and try to sell them in the worst parts of the stadium, and they're going to take 600 people from the university down there, and lo and behold, they end up $300,000 in the hole. I mean, the schools have realized that's just not feasible anymore. It's a ridiculous way to go when they can do all of it themselves. They could rent the facility. They could set somebody up in charge and take care of it, but they don't really want to. I think in the Bulls case, there's a history and a tradition there that they don't necessarily want to disrupt. But I think the system itself is that, hey, we'll pick who we want to go there. And I think one of the areas that is going to, my guess is, and this has not been specifically mentioned, but is maybe a way to get the SEC to 9 conference games. Will be allowed have some of the schools possibly participate at 5 wins, because I think some of the schools that have sat out and not wanted, to go to 9 games have done so because out of fear that they're not going to go to bowls. And I think if they could remove that, and if the SEC tells the bowls and tells the NCAA that's what we're going to do, then that's what they're going to do.
God, I hate that. I mean, it just, like, all these things, it just seems so unilateral, Scott. And it's bleak to me a little bit that, you have, over 140 schools that are part of this, but only 16 to 20 of them are really allowed to make decisions.
Yeah, I mean, these 2 conferences are dictating the terms, and a lot of it has come from the acquisitions of the last 15 years through realignment. I mean, I had the Pac-12 figure out its philosophy with Larry Scott, not completely imploded, had Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska decided to stay with the Big 12, then you would have all had like the heads of the 5 families or something in the Godfather series. I mean, you would have had, everybody could have been a counterweight against one another. But as these brands, these leagues acquired those kinds of powers, that the other schools are kind of powerless to stand up against them. I think, though, there's tiers. Unfortunately, the Big 12 and the ACC are a little bit behind the ACC and SEC when it comes to decision making and power struggle. And then you have the group of 5 schools that are substantially down from that. And maybe that isn't such a shame, because there's this growth, of teams moving up from FCS to FBS, but they're not the same. I mean, those schools moving up are not the same as Alabama or Michigan or Ohio State or Georgia. I mean, they're 2 different worlds. So I think it's unfortunate that this has gotten to be such a heavy power struggle, but I also think it's kind of the reality of where we live today.
Yeah. What did you make of Sankey's comments of, it's too early to talk about 26 and look-ins and governance and all that. We have to get this right this year. Is there more to that?
I think people are interpreting that maybe a little bit wrongly, and because Petitti said the same thing, and it really wasn't about making sure that I would say from the SEC perspective, wasn't necessarily about that they need to get 5 or 6 teams in and do that. I think it's really about a logistical situation, about making sure that these teams have that the teams that host, everything goes off, swimmingly well, and that's going to be a challenge. I mean, you figure at least one of the sites will probably be in the north in the middle of December, and you never know what kind of weather you're going to get. You're going to get it during graduation weekends and all those things that everybody conveniently overlooks. I mean, hotel shortages. And I think that's what they're looking at right now. It's like, let's not talk about 26 until after we go through this experience. So with that, in this situation, I think that he was being earnest about the upcoming playoff. I mean, I think Petitti's line was a little bit more pointed that, he wants to see how the committee interprets everything. And meaning that if the Big Ten has a 10-2 team that gets beaten out and had some quality games, then maybe that'll shake him in the direction of how he wants to proceed for 26 and beyond. But overall, there's a lot of logistics that they want to just make sure everything's going right, because the schools themselves, the ones they're going to host, they're the ones that are kind of worried about that.
Scott, when it comes to automatic qualifiers, I've always been of the belief that is the negotiating ploy to get what they really want out of it, because if you have to guarantee qualifiers in something, then you don't get the max of what you want. So if they're going to guarantee the SEC 4 and say the Big Ten 4 and the other one's 2 each, and they expand to 6, whatever it is, that they expand to 16, well, that means that they can't have 5 or 6 if they deserve it. So to me, that would be counterintuitive to Greg Sankey's, plot for domination, because he might wind up by saying it has to be 4 SEC teams, cutting off the possibilities of a year where he could have half the field.
Yeah, I think it depends on how big it's going to get. I mean, I would anticipate it going to 14. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. And the automatic qualifiers, I think they'll probably start talking about 4, and it'll go to 3 for those 2 leagues, and then 2 each for the ACC and Big 12, 1 for the Group of 5, and then 3 open at-large spots outside of that. That's my guess and what's going to happen in the future with the playoff. Now if it goes to 16, then yeah, I do think then it'll be 4. But I don't think there hasn't been much discussion about that. That's probably a next time around in the early 2030s. But I think that automatic qualifiers are coming because especially if the SEC goes to 9 games. There is a concern that, they beat each other up at these highly ranked teams, and you have a 9-3 team, and, what happens if 9-3 Georgia doesn't get in, but 10-2 Clemson does? I mean, that's kind of what they're pointing to right now.
And lastly, what do you make? Like, Brett Yormark has always said that all of his moves right now are about the next media contract. Like, everything that they're doing is to enhance it so that when the next football contract comes up, they can take a chunk out of, maybe not take a chunk out of, but take a step towards being the Big Ten and the SEC financially. Do you think that timetable is reasonable for the Big 12 and the ACC, even though the ACC still has some other issues to work out, obviously, with some malcontents in their conference?
Yeah, there's multiple. I mean, I think they're they're completely different. I mean, leagues and what they have issues going on. But I'll speak, to the Big 12 that, right now what would behoove them the most is, I mean, they have these incredible competitive brands and teams, and they do well. And if 1 or 2 of them could advance in the playoff and compete at a high level, and then that will be helpful. If they can play what we expect is maybe the best brand of basketball in the country and succeed there, I think it positions themselves very well. I mean, I'm kind of curious as to, the flirtation with UConn to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Right? I mean, basketball wise, just play them a couple of times. I don't know what in football, they don't bring anything. So I think, the Big 12 has done a decent job of that. And I think Yormark is bringing a fresh perspective, but it's still a little early on all of that. I think everybody wants to see just kind of go through the playoff structure at least once, and then probably expansion of the NCAA tournament, and then kind of go from there. But I think the Big 12, with its current alignment, is well positioned to make itself possibly the 3rd most profitable league, and it won't get near the claim and financial stability of the SEC or the Big Ten, but it'll put itself in that position to where it'll be a strong, vibrant conference for years to come.
Absolutely. Well, Scott, have a safe flight home. Now, you were in Nashville, and you're waiting in Dallas now, and you live in Iowa, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have
my 5th
grade.
Have a
direct flight.
Yeah, my 5th grade maps class tells me that Nashville to Dallas is in the opposite direction of Iowa.
Yeah, I know I'm like in one of these obtuse triangles or something, but
Yeah.
the geometry, which I'm terrible at, even go back then. But no, I'll be heading back to Iowa and cover what I think will be a pretty interesting game on Saturday morning between Washington and Iowa football. I think that'll be a really good matchup. But yeah, I really wished I could have connected in, say, Chicago or Detroit as opposed to Dallas.
Yeah. Well, look, enjoy everything that we in Texas have to offer in the airport. So I'm sure it's glorious whichever one you're in.
DFW, baby.
Oh yeah, there we go. All right, Scott, travel safe. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
That's Scott Dochterman with The Athletic. That was, pretty deep stuff there.